What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we dive into the top 5 win rate decks currently in Explorer Best of 1. Explorer is kind of that interesting format that got kind of introduced. We really haven't gotten any really new cards for it specifically. I know they said in the future they will start adding stuff. We'll kind of maybe see in the next maybe few weeks to months whether or not, we'll get new things outside of this typical set releases. But with that being said, each of these 5 decks will definitely be good for play in Best of 1. Also, the upcoming play-in event, I think that is this upcoming weekend after this video goes live. So it is definitely one of those things. If you're looking to play Explorer, these decks could all be possible options for that particular event. But with that being said, let's just dive into the decks and let's just talk about them. So the first deck up here on the list is a Golgari Fight rigging style deck. The one benefit in Explorer is because we do have the larger card pool, we do also have more options in the 3-drop slot and various other slots of the deck to get more powerful cards that work very well with the Fight rigging spell. If you don't know what Fight rigging does, it's an enchantment spell that came with Streets of New Capenna that every time at the beginning of our combat each turn we get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. If we then control a creature with power 7 or greater, we may play an exiled creature without paying its mana cost, or exiled card without paying its mana cost. So the one benefit here is you get a lot of value for a very cheap mana, and the one benefit, like I said, is there's a lot of very powerful cards, even in the 3-drop slot, that kind of get us to that 7 power very, very quickly. One of them being is a Rod and Regisaur. It's a 3-mana 7/6, so already it's a 7 power creature, and the only downside is at the beginning of our upkeep we have to discard a card. If we have no cards in hand, we don't have to discard anything. The other card is being Shakedown Heavy. This is kind of like the card, if you've seen Golgari rigging in Standard, this is kind of like the card that they use as their main card that really gets them to that 7 power pretty quickly. But it's a 6/4 with Menace, and whenever it attacks, the opponent player may draw a card, or you may draw a card if your opponent wants to untap it and remove Shakedown Heavy from combat. Outside of that, we also have some other powerful cards that can kind of work around as well. You have Rojas, the Indomitable, 3-mana 5/5 with Death Touch and Indestructible. It's not a 7 power creature, but it's definitely an indestructible creature with Death Touch, which is definitely very good, and it can't attack or block unless you control another creature with power 4 or greater, so it kind of works very well with our Fight rigging spell. And then we can give, by tapping 3 mana, another creature +2/+0 and trample to end a turn, so that's definitely good. Outside of that, we also have Elder Gargaroth. It's a 5-mana 6/6 with Vigilance and Reach. It's a very powerful card in that it has a lot of things. One, it can attack and have to tap. It can block things in the air, and it also has trample. Then whenever it attacks and or blocks, we get to create a 3/3 beast creature token, gain 3 life, or draw a card. So definitely versatile and definitely good for what we're trying to do with the deck. Verderis Gearhulk, it's a 5-mana 4/4 trampler that when it enters the battlefield, we get to distribute 4+1/+1 counters among any number of creatures we control. So we can put all 4 counters on one creature. We can put 1 counter on 4 different creatures. We can, like I said, split them up in every way we want to. As well as we also have things like Titan of Industry, another great card from Streets of New Capenna. It's a 7-mana 7/7 with Reach and Trample. When it enters battlefield, we can choose 2 of its 4 effects, which is destroy target artifact or enchantment. Target player gains 5 life. We create a 4/4 green Rhino creature token, and we get to put a shield counter on target creature control. And the one thing I will say with what we're trying to do here is a lot of these spells, as well as if we don't cast them in like our 3-turn or in the early game, are definitely great spells if we hit them with the Fight rigging to put underneath Fight rigging and then get to play them for free, especially these more expensive top-end cards. Another great card for the deck is like a Great Henge. It makes all our creatures that much stronger, and every time we play a creature, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on that creature and also draw a card, and then whenever we tap it for 2 mana, we gain 2 life. But overall, this deck is definitely pretty cool. It is also playing odd creatures, and if you were around when Ikoria was a thing, we are playing Obosh, the Pyre Piercer, a 5-mana, I guess companion. It's kind of like a commander, but our starting deck contains only cards with odd mana value, so that's what we're doing here. And if a sorcerer we control with odd mana value would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So essentially, what this does is we get these big creatures. If they have trample, that's even better. We play this, it makes them deal double the damage instead of what their base power would actually do normally. And the one thing I would also say when it comes to playing a much larger format is you do definitely play a lot more non-basics. We do have a lot of things that are definitely very strong mana-wise. We have, Overgrown Tombs, which are shock lands. They deal 2 life to you to have them come in the battlefield untapped, but they produce black or green, and they all are swamps and forests, kind of like the Triomes, but they only have 2 mana. We have Deathcap Glade, which is a card from, Crimson Vow, a decent dual land for the deck. We have access to Pathways. We have Bloom and Marsh, which is another great card. It's creates black or green, and it comes in the battlefield untapped unless we control 2 or fewer Comes in the battlefield tapped unless we control 2 or fewer, so it's a great early turn land. We have, Lair of the Hydra to dump mana in the later game as a creature land. We also have Castle Garenbrig, which is a cool land in the sense that we can tap 4 mana and add 6 mana to then cast creature spells or activate creature abilities. So overall, it's definitely an interesting deck. It's definitely one of those decks that tries to go over the top and trying to sneak out creatures by casting spells with Fight Reagan. So definitely a cool deck to try out. Right now on the ladder, it's sitting about a little over 58%, a 58.3% win rate. Average match duration is about 4.5 minutes, and in about 370 games. Like I said, it's kind of like still early because we just recently had a Winota ban and Explorer, so I do think people are still trying to figure out what's really the top deck, but definitely still a good win rate nonetheless for if you're looking to get into Explorer and play a cool Fight Reagan spell deck that kind of does a lot of cool things. So this next deck up on the list is kind of a deck list you may have seen in Historic, as most of the cards are still legal in Historic and playable, as well as also playable in Explorer. And this is a Selesnya Angels deck, and this is kind of one of those decks that's like a mono white deck with a splash of green just for the Collected Company, which is definitely a very strong card. But overall, the deck is Angel Tribal with a lot of ways to gain a bunch of life. If you've ever seen an Angel deck, life gain's always very good, because once we get over our 27 health that we start, our 20, if we get 7 over that 20 health we start out with, all our creatures will get additional +2/+2, as well as whenever they enter in, we'll gain that additional life equal to their toughness. So a lot of the angels do have high toughness rather than power. It's also clerics and angels with this card. So like a card like Bishop of Wings is a 2 mana 1/4, so we'll gain 4 life just from it coming to battlefield after Righteous Valkyrie. And then if an angel we control would die, we still get a 1/1 spirit creature token with flying, so that's definitely very good. But overall, this is just a very strong, angel life gain deck, and Collected Company just makes it that much better because Collected Company is another strong card at 4 mana instant speed, so we can do it on our turn, we can do it on our opponent's turn, we can do it at the end of our opponent's turn, just in case they just try to do some things and maybe we catch them off guard. But we look at the top 6 cards of our library, put 2 cards with a mana value among 3 or less among them onto the battlefield. So essentially everything outside of Ajani and Emirius Call, everything else in our deck can be played with this, and we can play 2 of them, and then we put the rest in the bottom of our library any random order. So yet again, another strong card. So it's for 4 mana. We can get a possibility of 2 3-drops. We get a 3-drop and a 2-drop. Overall, just a very strong card. But, Angels has kind of been that thing that's been pretty decent in the Historic meta. And right now with Pioneer kind of being more limited, or I should say Explorer being a little more limited and not on the same level as Pioneer, Angels is still very good for what it does. It's still a very strong deck, as we do have a lot of good cards that makes it that much better. And it's especially having the addition of cards from other sets that are older makes this deck that much better. So definitely a cool little deck to try out if you're looking to play Angel Tribal in a more broader format. And this deck is in a little bit 58.4%, so a little bit better than the last deck we went over. Has more matches played at 710, and the average game length takes about 4.8 minutes. And typically the reason why is that it takes a little bit of time to build up your life value to then go over the top against your opponent. But yet again, it's still a cool deck to check out if this is your thing. The next deck up on the list is a mono red aggro deck. Mono red's been a very strong deck ever since like Throne of Eldraine has been standard relevant. It added a bunch of new cards to mono red that when those cards were legal in standard, it was like the deck that everyone was playing, especially if you're looking to play aggro. Overall, this deck is definitely on the strong side, and with having access to a much larger card pool of red creatures, the deck becomes even better. If you think about like the Boros aggro, this deck is the original Boros aggro in standard, so definitely a pretty aggressive deck to say the least. So key cards in the deck that make this card deck really good is you have something like an Annex Harden of the Forge. It's a 3 mana star 3. Its base power and toughness are equal to the devotion of red creatures we control or red spells we control on the battlefield. So every red symbol on the battlefield will make this creature's power that much bigger. And it comes in the battlefield if it was by itself as a 2/3. And then when it dies, we get to create 1/1 standard creature tokens that can't block, but they just create creatures that replace creatures. So that's definitely very good. And once his power goes over 4, we create 2 instead of 1. So definitely a good card there. Another strong card with the deck is Thorban, Thane of the Redfall, a 4 mana 2/4 Dwarf Noble that whenever a red sorcerer control will deal damage to an opponent, it deals that much damage +2. So it turns even our smallest creatures that are 1/1s into that much stronger creatures that deal more damage, so it definitely makes them that much more of a threat. And then the card that kind of capitalizes all these strong aggro creatures is Embercleave. This is The equipment, this is kind of like that big finisher. It's a 6 mana equipment with flash, and you'd be like, wow, that's a really expensive equipment. How is it so good? Well, it costs 1 less to cast for each attacking creature we control, and then when it enters the battlefield, we have to automatically attach it to a creature we control. So you play it forever, how many creatures are attacking, put it on a creature, it gives that creature +1/+1 and double strike and trample. So essentially this is kind of like the way mono red decks kind of finish off your opponent. And the other thing too with it, it does cost 3 to equip, but we do play a card like Fervent Champion, which is a 1 mana 1/1 that's a human knight. And his cool ability is that equip abilities you activate to target Fervent Champion, costs 3 less to activate. So essentially we can put this on a Fervent Champion for free if, you know, maybe the creature that we originally had it on did die in the process. But double strike gives, you know, most of the things in our deck that much. Double strike will pretty much kill most things in that creature's way before even the creature dies in the process. So like, you know, Annex is a great target for an Embercleave just because Annex just plus Embercleave are already 4 devotion, so Annex is a 4/3 with the +1/+1 becomes a 5/4, and then it has double strike, so can possibly deal 10 damage in 1 fell swing. But overall, this deck is definitely very good. It's definitely interesting to see this deck exist in a standard thing, and a lot of the pieces that are in here outside of a few things. If you look at Burning Tree Emissary, you remove the Limousine because it didn't exist when it was out, and you kind of get rid of all of that. And this is kind of almost like the base. Well, I guess you get rid of this too. This is, I guess get rid of most things. But this is essentially what Mono Red almost consisted of, and these cards are just added additions to the deck that make that much better. And this is still, yet again, another great deck to check out. Right now it's in about a 58.7% win rate, so a little bit more than the previous 2 decks that happened before this. It does not have as many matches yet again. But it is still a good deck to check out if you're looking to, play something aggressive. If you've been playing for a while, you probably already have these cards, so it's definitely, it's definitely maybe something to check out if you have a lot of cards from Thornwell Drain or the previous standard for the most part. But yet again, a cool deck to check out, and definitely should play it if you're looking for something super aggressive. Now, the next deck up on the list is probably one of the most frustrating decks to play against when it comes to playing Explorer, or even Historic for that matter, and that is Jund Food. The reason why this deck is very annoying to play against is because it's a very ticky-tacky kind of way it plays. A lot of the reason is because you play Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven, so it's a lot of looping of Cauldron Familiars from the graveyard with sacrificing foods, pinging your opponent for a point of damage, and it's a lot of 1/1/1, and then that kind of gets your opponent low, and then we have other ways to kind of finish off our opponent when we get to that point. Like I said, I mean, really the main strategy is Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, and then we combine that with Mayhem Devil, which then helps us deal that 1 additional point to our opponent that we have to target. Or we can remove creatures, with that 1 point of damage. And it's whenever, and then the other benefit of that is whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, so now it turns that, food we're sacrificing to the Cauldron Familiar into a point of damage, as well as the Cauldron Familiar being sacrificed is also a point of damage. So it's just a lot of loops of pinging your opponent 1 point here and there by sacrificing foods to loop certain things. And then like the card that kind of finishes it off your opponent once you kind of get into that late game state is going to be Korvold, Fate of the Curse King. It's a 5 mana 4/4. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, we have to we sacrifice another permanent, so we can sacrifice lands, creatures, anything that we have on the battlefield. And then whenever we sacrifice a permanent, we get to put a +1/+1 counter and draw a card. So it kind of has a little bit of tempo in, and it gets bigger the longer it stays on the battlefield and is attacking. But this is definitely one of those lists that I feel like people, when you see this matchup, you're like, oh, this is not the one I want to play against, just because it is one of those matchups that are kind of frustrating. Definitely a good deck to say the least, though. It's just a little bit annoying to play against, just because you're doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that to kind of, get these little points of damage in, and then hopefully when you get into that late game, you can then finish off your opponent. Yet again, because we are playing spells that have no card in our starting deck can have more than 1 mana of the same symbol in its cost. We can play Gigantha as our companion, and then it's just an additional creature that we can bring to our hand for 3 mana and just have a 5/5 for 5 mana. So definitely an interesting deck to say the least. Definitely a little bit more on the expensive side. As you can see here, the mana base is mostly rare lands for the most part, when you play these extended formats, you know, you play the more rare lands just because they have a lot more strengths, and this is definitely a good example of how diverse and how strong, you know, playing the rare lands are when it comes to playing a larger format. But yet again, you know, this is a deck that jumps up from the previous 3 decks we already went over. It's sitting probably a little bit over 63% at 63.1. Yet again, just like every other deck, we don't have a lot of matches. Sitting a little over 100 matches at 110 matches, 6.2 win rate. Our 6.2 minutes to play, just because of the way the process of this deck takes in order to actually you know, get the damage when, you know, it tries to drain your opponent down. But definitely, yet again, a good choice, a good deck. And in a very limited Explorer meta or format with not as many cards, this is definitely one of those decks that will be pretty prominent for quite a while until we get some new cards to the format. And the last deck up on the list is kind of the deck list that our deck that is, I think, probably the strongest out of all of them, and that is Mardu Greasefang. If you haven't seen any of like the reanimate combo decks, this is kind of like the Explorer's version of that. This is definitely a very strong deck on what it's trying to do. It does have a lot of ways to, you know, discard spells. It wants to get artifacts in the graveyard. It wants you to discard spells to do certain things. And then we try to cheat things out on the battlefield well before they're supposed to be played based on their mana cost. And the one card that kind of helps us is Greasefang. If you haven't seen Greasefang in any form, it's a 3-mana 4/3. At the beginning of our combat on our turn, we get to return target vehicle card from the battlefield. It gains haste and return to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So it's definitely an interesting you know, creature. It gets a vehicle that we've discarded earlier in the game, hopefully by the time we play this. And now we get to get that card out on the battlefield for cheap. You know, we do have cards like Parhelion, a 8 mana 5/5 flying vigilance for a strike. It also has crew 4, so we can use the Greasefang that we just played to crew it and then be able to attack in with it. And then whenever it attacks, we get to create 2 4/4 white angel creature tokens of Flying and Vigilance that are also attacking. So essentially on turn 3, possibly you could essentially attack your opponent then for 13 damage with just this one card. This card gets bounced to your hand. You are still left with 2 4/4s, and at that point your opponent's probably pretty close to death, and they probably will just scoop in that sense. The other card is also Sky Sovereign, a Council Flagship, a 5 mana 6/5 vehicle that whenever it enters the battlefield and or attacks, it deals 3 damage to target opponent, to target creature, planeswalker, and opponent controls. So in itself, this creature also has some spot removal, as well as a 6/5 that you can play, and it goes very well yet again with Greasefang for being you know, a crew of 3, so we can tap Greasefang to crew this. But really, this is Parhelion is really the big creature that we're crewing with Greasefang. And when the Winota bannings happened, people were outspoken about how Greasefang's also a problem currently in the format. And I definitely can see why, just because playing something like that on turn 3 is definitely a very strong thing. I'm not 100% sure if Greasefang is really a thing in Pioneer, but it is definitely still a good deck to play when it comes to this whole, you know, reanimating stuff and trying to just cheat out something very, very early. And turn 3 is super early to get something super powerful out like that. Outside of that, the deck is just a bunch of stuff that's going to help us try to discard and draw and find the answers we need. You know, we have things like Citrus Supplier, which is a 1 mana 1/1 that helps us mill things into the graveyard, hopefully mill in one of our creatures and not a Greasefang. You have Lightning Axe, which is a 1 mana deal 5 damage to target creature, instant speed, and then, you know, as additional cost to play this spell, we have to discard a card or pay an additional 5. So yet again, another spell to just help us discard. We have things that create blood tokens like Voldaren Epicure and also Blood Tithe Harvester, and then we can use the blood tokens to discard a card and sacrifice it and then draw a card. You have things like Croxa, which then, you know, if we have other things in the graveyard other than vehicles, we can always escape out, and it's a 2 mana 6/6, and that makes our opponent then discard a card and deal 3 and make them lose 3 life. We also have Can't Stay Away, which is a 2 mana sorcery, return target creature card mana value 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield, and it gains if this creature would die, we exile instead. So yet again, if we do lose a Greasefang, we can then get it back for only 2 mana and then essentially trigger Greasefang and then trigger Greasefang's ability. Deadly Disputes here in case we want to sacrifice one of our cheap creatures and then just draw a card and you know, create a treasure. Fable of the Mirror Breaker is also here to help us discard on the second chapter. We may discard up to 2 cards if we draw that many cards. So overall, this deck is just that strong. It's definitely a good deck. It's definitely probably one of the decks, if you do decide to play a lot of Explorer, this is definitely one of those decks you'll see a lot of currently in the format, as I do think it makes up a pretty decent proportion of the format. It is on the expensive side. I don't outside of maybe a couple commons and uncommons, it really is full of rares and mythics. So that's why it is also very powerful, as you're cheating out things that are definitely super strong. But guys, with that being said, I mean, this is just a little taste of what is to expect when it comes to Explorer. These are some of your options if you're looking to play some pretty high win rate decks. It probably will vary if you're looking to play a little bit more best of 3. What's really that much, what's really that good. But overall, let me know if you liked the video, if you hit that like button. If you want to, see more videos on Explorer, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new here, you want to know I post new videos on the channel, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next video. Just want to give a special shout out to the channel members here on my YouTube channel. You can also become a channel member yourself down below the video, hitting that join button. It definitely helps out a lot, and I just appreciate you guys for your support.